Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about the problem of programming and training isolation movements. And I used footage from the last week or two in this particular video of me actually doing some of the isolation work that I personally do, so that it doesn't give the impression that I am anti-isolation movement or telling people not to do isolation movement. But I want people to understand one of the reasons why big heavy compound movements should always be the focus of your training, a minimum of 90% of your actual training focus, if not more. Always, irrespective of what your personal goals are or why you're in the weight room, because people have dozens of different reasons why they lift. And when I use the term training, I'm going to use something that's written on every single training forum, even the goofy bodybuilding forums. Have articles and stuff about this, and that's the difference between exercise and training, and that's why, again, we would call a curl a bicep exercise. An exercise is any physical activity in which you participate in for an acute result, meaning a result that day. You want to burn energy, you want to relieve stress, you want to burn calories, you maybe just want to get a pump or fatigue a muscle, whatever it is. You have a temporary feeling or goal that you want from exercise. Training is a systematic approach in which you are planning for a long-term outcome, and you systematically approach whatever exercise you are doing. Exercise is combination in a systematic way in which you are trying to produce a long-term chronic result, 6 weeks down the road, a year down the road, 5 years down the road. You're training for a specific long-term outcome, and you plan for it accordingly in the way that you structure and do all your exercises. All right, and that's the problem we run into. How do you program an isolation movement? Because it's very difficult, because a big compound movement, we already know when we're dealing with multiple joints and everything else, we can rotate through variations of focusing on the movement pattern more, the explosiveness, the neuromuscular efficiency, the motor unit learning, versus just hypertrophy. And we can put different emphasis in different phases, and we can rotate through different training styles and periodize these things and use different progression patterns. And it's because big compound movements have more involved than just the direct muscle stimulation of a given muscle. It has to do with an actual movement pattern. You can program around that and get a lot more results. The problem with an isolation movement, a bicep curl, there is very, very little difference between the size and strength of that muscle. There's also almost no way to program for improving that muscle. It is only going to improve at the rate at which it grows, meaning you don't have a motor pattern. There is no movement pattern to learn. A curl is a curl. All right, your curl, your elbow bends, that's what it does. Accordingly, bicep curl strength is, for each individual person, almost 100% determined by the size of the muscle fibers in their bicep and the different insertion points and levers of the arms. There's not much you can do to train it as a movement pattern, and accordingly you're going to find different periodizations and rep ranges and things like that don't seem to help with isolating a muscle group. You can't program for it. All you can do is make it grow. And this is one of the biggest problems we run into, is that there's no way to prevent stalls. In other words, there is literally nothing you can do to program around to prevent or push past a plateau on a bicep curl. Other than cheating, you could do cheat reps, you could change range of motion to move more weight, but that's not going to increase the performance, the size, or anything any quicker. You stall very quickly and very easily on isolation movements. And even if you wanted to try a micro-loading approach, that can't even be done half the time with the equipment at your gym. You literally would have to bring, let's say for a barbell curl or a dumbbell curl or something of that nature, to micro-load it. The dumbbells are usually in 2.5 pound increments. Usually the plates in the gym are 2.5 pound plates. So if you put it, you're stuck with 5 pound jumps. 5 pound jumps. That is an enormous jump for a muscle that small using such a light weight. You can't microload it unless you're bringing 4-ounce magnets, zero point 0.1 kilo magnets to the gym to stick onto the dumbbells and the barbells and stuff like that. That's the only way you're going to microload it. It's not easy to program any sort of progression on these the way that it is on multi-joint movements that respond better, because there's a motor unit learning curve and you can focus on different performance elements. There's almost no performance element to a bicep curl other than the muscle growing. This is accordingly one of the things I've noted, and why I say all the time that the standard bodybuilder response to a stall is to up the dose of their drugs. Because if they're focused on 50% or more of the work they're doing is isolation movements, over 50% of their training can't really be programmed. It can't be programmed in a way that pushes them past plateaus and stalls. They can't periodize it. They don't even benefit much from doing concurrent style training or non-linear periodization and things like that. So that's kind of the point that needs to be considered with this. So how do we deal with this? You use isolation movements for what they're intended for. What is the reason for an isolation movement? We know it won't put as much muscle on you as a compound movement. We know it won't. That shouldn't even be subject to debate. I'll tell you right now, you take two guys in the gym, you have one of them, you teach him to bench press correctly, so that he does use his chest, and you have both of them trained for a year on whatever progression pattern you come up with that's time proven. One of them does a bench press and the other does a dumbbell fly. Who's going to have a bigger chest at the end of the year? You're going to find the guy on the bench press is probably going to have slightly more chest. Isolation movements do not produce superior size results. What they do is they allow you to focus on a lagging muscle and put more fatigue in it, to force it to do more work because it needs additional work that you can't provide in a compound movement. And the reason for that compound movement could be your recovery. And that's usually the biggest reason you use an isolation movement. You cannot recover from additional volume on a compound movement. You can only handle so many sets of bench press in a day or a week before your recovery becomes an issue. You can only handle so many sets of deadlifts in a day or a week before you will no longer be able to recover. Isolation movements somewhat isolate oftentimes a much smaller muscle, and it has less impact on your systematic recovery. So if you have a muscle, let's say it's your triceps or your chest or your biceps, that needs additional work because it isn't getting as much fatigue as you like, and you realize it's a weak link, whether that weak link is aesthetically or strength-wise, you can come in and work that region a little more to give it a little more fatigue without overtaxing the rest of your system. So the question becomes, how do you program that? You don't have to program that. And here's why. And that is one of the biggest questions I get asked when it comes to, hey, my isolation work, how do I program that on a bigger program? You don't need to. All right, if you reach a point in your bench press to where you are doing X amount of sets, reps with whatever weight. Okay, you're moving a certain amount of tonnage or work done in a week. And you come in and you add a tricep exercise. Did you just increase the work that your triceps are doing? Of course you did. Let's say you come in and you decide with a certain point you're going to do 75 pounds on a tricep extension for 3 sets of 10. 3 sets of 10, we'll throw that number out there. If you increase anything on your bench press, did your triceps do more work? If you keep doing the exact same tricep movement for 3 months, of course it does. Your triceps are getting more work and more fatigue and more adaptative stress because you're progressing on the bigger lift, even if you keep the isolation work the same. The isolation work afterwards can be used to create additional fatigue. But if you increase the weight on the bar by 5 pounds on your bench pressing, your triceps are going into the isolation work having done more work already. So the sum total tonnage that they move that week and work that they do is higher because the big movement went up, the one that you can program. The other is there to add workload and extra fatigue to facilitate more growth. Do you understand the difference here? And when you understand that and look at it from that perspective, it becomes important to understand isolation movements aren't there to be programmed. You don't progress fast on isolation movements. They don't contribute enormous amounts in the grand scheme of things, but they create additional fatigue. And so if you're progressing on the big lifts, it's not necessarily that critical that the secondary movement that you are doing to stimulate the extra muscle growth go up, because it's already getting more total stimulus from the entirety of the workout. So it removes the necessity to put any focus on the programming of the isolation movements. You use them for what they're there for, to create extra stress on a weak point. That's it. That's the only reason we need them. Use them accordingly and these problems go away. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.